Hello, everyone. Welcome back. As usual, if you can turn on your cameras, thank you. Good. So, moving forward, announcement first. Today, you have a quiz. It's going to open by the end of the lecture, and you have all day to complete. It's a couple of questions, 20 minutes, mostly about our lectures 2 to 6, the papers. Basic questions about things that we review during the lecture, open book, but you have 20 minutes. So complete your quiz today. Also, I am going to talk about your second assignment, programming assignment. As the previous one, you can work alone or you can work with someone else. So one people or two, your assignment, you're going to have 1 week to work. 1 week. This time, I am asking you for the source code, as in the assignment 1. Source code, again, be careful with this. Be sure that your code is easy to read. Be sure to use correctly Javadoc. I already give you feedback about the previous one. Review the guidelines for Java. And just to be sure, your code should compile and run. If you submit something that didn't compile or we cannot execute, you are not going to receive points. Additionally, this time I am asking you also to submit a document, a PDF file. The PDF, I am asking you for a class diagram. This assignment, object-oriented, so we're moving to that. Something that we are going to review today, classes and the diagrams, the pictures. The diagram and the code are equivalent. The diagram is the blueprint of your source code. I am asking you for the class diagram, not just as a picture to decorate the project. We are going to review that your diagram match your code. If you put in your diagram a particular relationship, inheritance, we're expecting to have that in your source code. And that is going to be an important part of your grading. I am sure that you can complete the project. I am sure that you can do the coding. Programming is not the core of this class, but match the class diagram and the code. Be sure that you understand the blueprint and the implication in the code. That is one of the core parts in your grading. So class diagram, and be sure that the class diagram match the source code. Additionally, screenshots, 3 of them. I am going to talk more about it, but 3 use cases, running your program with an easy, medium, and hard input. I am going to share with you some inputs. And at the end, 1 paragraph, 2 paragraphs, tell me a bit about the quality and the limitations, if there are some, of your solution. Usually is the space in which you can tell me if you finish or not, and what do you think about your solution. Use a conclusion, 1 paragraph or 2, 1 people or 2. Share me your thoughts. This can be 1 or 2 pages, the diagram, the screenshots, and the paragraph. Good? So, details. I am going to give you the requirements, but before, I need to talk more about the class diagrams and be sure that we are all in the same page. Previous lecture, we move forward to UML 2.0. Every time that I ask you for a diagram, in particular, now with the class diagrams, I am talking about this. If you are going to go to the internet and you're going to review UML tutorials or documents or whatever, just be sure that they are talking about at least that one. The notation that you're going to use, my recommendation, review your book or a book, whatever you choose. Be careful with the online tutorials. There are a lot of garbage online regarding UML. Be careful. So talking about that and things that I want you to be careful in a specific. These relationships, all of them are clear for you. Do we understand that those are the only symbols available in UML? Nothing else. Are you familiar with them? In a previous class, your background, you know the meaning of this. Yes, no. I have one yes. Any no? Okay. Just to be sure. Number one, relationships between classes. Previous lecture, we talked about them. Can you tell me which are the relationships that you can have between two classes? The names. Chat. I am going to split inheritance in the particularities. So these are the names of the relationship between classes. Realization, generalization, and specialization are the particular names of three subcategories connected with inheritance. All of this is about inheritance. If we're talking about realization, generalization, specialization, we're talking about the relationship of inheritance. That is the global name, that is the type, but the subtype, the subcategory is one of these three. Now, talking about aggregation and composition. They are the subcategories, but the category, we are talking about having. Usually between two classes, the name, the connection is has. The class A, the class B, we connect them. One has the other, something from the other. Having. If we're talking about having, we have two subcategories. Has or having something in aggregation or in composition. It's not the same. And finally, here, we do not have subcategories, only one, use or using. If one class is using the other, the relationship, there is no other option, association, right? So, help me. I have a class. I have a class A and a class B, and I want to represent in a diagram that A is using B. I am just using the letters. Later you can think about A is a student and B is a book or whatever. A use B. What is the notation in UML for using, for association? Each of these names correspond to one particular kind of arrow and one particular kind of arrowhead. So association, use a line, correct. Important. If I have a line, the line represents bidirectional connection. If you have only one line, what you really have is something like this. The line without arrowhead is representing bidirectionality. So the line without the arrowhead is really something like this. That is the meaning, is A is using B, but also B is using A. Only adding the line means that both classes are using each other. So Be careful when you do not put arrowheads. The meaning is bidirectionality. Not always we want to represent that. So in my particular example, the only thing that I want is A using B. So for A using B, the correct diagram is something like this. A using B, the arrowhead is pointing to the element that is being used, and the arrow go out from the element that is the user. Usually what you're going to have is the element in which the arrow start is the important one. A is the important one. A is the one using some kind of tool or something small, not important, that is B. Help me, in the source code, if I give you this diagram, what is the source code equivalent to this A using B? What is the meaning of this draw in the source code of a program in Java? Using association in source code is equivalent to one particular thing, calling a method. Good. Just want to be sure. For this particular case, we're talking about a class A, and using B basically mean that one method in A is going to call a method in B. Obviously, if you're going to call a method, you call a method inside of another method. So notice that the diagram didn't tell you which is the method calling which one. We don't care. The only thing that we care in the diagram is I have one method in A calling a method in B. Maybe more, but that is the relationship. This class is using the other because one method, at least here, is calling one method there. When you transform to source code the details, well, class A should have a method, whatever is the method, and somehow I need to call one of the methods in the other class, the public methods. So in some place here, I am going to call the method there. Now, in order to call a method in the other class, you have two options. The class, the method could be static. So you can have something like the name of the class dot the name of the method. That is part of the translation. However, the other option is the method is not static. Therefore, you need an object B, and you are going to have inside here something like that. You need the object because without the object, you cannot call the method. You have an object. But if you are using association, if I give you this diagram with association, you create the object, but the object is a local variable. It's not global. Why? Because if we have the object global, the relationship is a different one. The relationship is going to be having aggregation or composition. So again, association, calling a method. In order to call a method, maybe you need an object. That object should be local variable, not global. Something like this, the source code in red represent or is equivalent to my diagram above. Using. Good? Now, I just mentioned aggregation and composition. What if I have a class X and another class Y, and I want to represent that X has a Y. what is the notation for having that relationship between two classes in a diagram? Do you remember the important element in UML in order to establish having aggregation composition? Yes. We need a diamond. This having is always connected with the use of diamonds. Now, we need a diamond. And the line. Notice, the diamond is going to be with the class that is the owner. I mentioned this, X has a Y. Having the owner is X, that is the one that is going to have the diamond together. And the line is going to connect with the object, the item that the other one has. So always diamonds. Diamonds for aggregation is going to be the white diamond. For composition, as we mentioned, is going to be a black diamond. White diamond, black diamond, aggregation, composition. Source code. What is the equivalent in source code for this? How do you represent or how you translate this diagram, X has a Y aggregation, to the source code? As an attribute, correct. That is the key idea. Having even aggregation or composition is all about attributes. Attributes, be clear, global variables. In order to represent in the source code the diamond, every single time that you put the diamond in a class diagram, what you are telling me is there is a global variable, there is an attribute in this class, and the type is the other one. So in this case, if I have my class X, you are telling me that there is here an attribute from Y, whatever is the name of the class. That is having. That is aggregation in this particular case. White diamond, the variable. Tell me, what is the difference between aggregation and composition? And we talked a little bit about this before. Aggregation versus composition. Aggregation gives me the possibility of I could have that or not. That element could be null. With composition, it is mandatory that I have that element. I need that element. I cannot exist without that element. Therefore, the element cannot be null. The typical example, if you think about classes, usually car, engine, and wheel. Something that you're going to represent is, well, car has, the relationship is having at least one of these, and this, having. Now, the engine in a car can be null. The wheels in the car can be null. Null means that in some point the car exists without that element. Your decision usually in this example is, well, if the car do not have the wheels, it's still a car. Temporarily do not have the wheels, we're going to replace, we're going to improve, whatever. The wheels are kind of quotation mark optional, something that we can add later. White diamond. But however, for the engine, usually the thinking process is, well, a car is not a car if that car cannot move. And without the engine, it do not really make sense to call an object a car that do not have an engine. That thinking in the diagram is, well, the car has things, two things, but one is composition, the other is aggregation. The wheels is something that we aggregate, white diamond. The engine is something that is a composition, is something that is composing the object. The object cannot exist without that. The car cannot exist without the engine. We represent that with the black diamond. So both variables, both attributes, one of them provide the possibility of null values, the other not. In my example here, if I do something like adding a constructor and in the constructor providing value for this y, or if I just go with this practice of doing something like this, when I do that, that variable y is always going to have a value. Cannot be null because I am initializing them outside. And the same could happen if I initialize the variable inside of the constructor. If I do this source code, what I am doing is now the diagram cannot be a white diamond. Now the diagram is going to be black. So source code, diagram, white or black, have implications in the source code that we create, have implications in the meaning, the idea that we're trying to share with others. Clear so far? Yeah, that is correct. You have a container, you can have a container in both directions. All the collections, all the data structures that you know, linked lists, trees, and so on, usually they allow to have elements that are null. A linked list is the first pointer pointing to null. So for a linked list of elements, a linked list of nodes, the connection is a white diamond because the null is allowed. There are other kind of containers in other kind of scenarios, systems, in which you cannot have null elements. The object never can be null. The objects are initialized from the beginning. In those cases, you put the black diamond. Good? But this is basically the idea of the container, the elements. Nulls or not are allowed, black or white, period. Okay, so moving to the last one, the inheritance. For the inheritance, the only thing that I need to be sure that you remember, realization. What is realization? It's inheritance, but what is the particularity about realization? You have realization when you're connecting an interface and a class. So if you have this class here, and this one is an interface, and you have a class here, whatever class, always, the connection between an interface as a father and a class as a child is realization. You are using the interface to create the class. And the connection is going to be the triangle white with the dashed line. Again, the father is an interface, the child is a class, realization. It's inheritance. In Java, implements. Those elements involved, then realization. So in Java, every single time that you implement a listener, that is the arrow, that is the line that you should use. Your class, your listeners, inheritance, implements, but the line is not solid. What if I have an interface, the parent, and I have another interface as a child? Can I use inheritance between interfaces? One interface being the parent of another interface? Yes or no? Yes. And what is the keyword that we use in Java for that? Extend. So what could be the arrow here? Solid or not? What? Yeah. Realization, interface, and class. If you have an interface and a class connected, the interface is the parent, the class is the child, you are doing realization, the line is not solid. If you're doing inheritance between two interfaces, what you're doing is generalization and specialization between interfaces. The line is solid. Exactly the same if you have a class and another class, the line is solid. If they are the same, interface, solid. Class, solid. Is inheritance. If you have one-on-one, realization is inheritance, but realization mode. What about the difference between generalization and specialization? There is no difference. The only thing is, how do you read the things? For instance, this one, interface B, interface A. You can say that interface A is a generalization of interface B, generalization parent. Interface A is the parent of B. In this example, interface A is a generalization of B. You are reading the inheritance top down. The opposite, interface B is a specialization of interface A, or interface B is a child of interface A. Exactly the same with the classes, class A, class B. Class A is a generalization of class B, or class B is a specialization of class A. Generalization, the father is the one that generalizes. Specialization, the childs are the ones that are special. The specialization of the parent. Good? Tricky question for your exam. Can I connect a class at the parent and an interface at the child? And if so, what do I use? Solid line or dash line? Okay, I have a no. Someone else? Yes or no? Can I connect a class and an interface where the class is the parent and the interface is the child? Okay, thank you. No, this case is just do not possible, right? So we didn't think about which is the line that we use there. It's like, that is not possible. Never, never, never. You're going to connect a class in which the triangle is pointing to the class and the line, solid or not, is going out from the interface. If you have something like this in a class diagram, zero, garbage, right? Because again, it's not only about the draw, it's what the draw means. So when you have a triangle pointing to a class and the line is in the other side in an interface, something is very, very wrong. Okay, these are the only relationships that you have, nothing else. This is UML. From the internet, from one of those foobar tutorials that then you are going to use for the appeals, hopefully not. Well, the inner class is just a class. In the diagram, you represent the inner class just as the other ones. There is no really particular difference, and the relationship that you can have, the same ones. If you notice, the relationships are used about creating objects, the relationships are used about calling methods, and this particularity of implement and extend. There is no other thing directly represented in the diagram connected with that particularity. So use another box. By the way, something that I will recommend you is avoid the inner classes. And we're going to talk more about the details and how to replace inner classes for other things. Don't worry, but a key idea of modularization is that you have one file, one class. The class is what we are using as our modules, remember? When you start using inner classes, one is okay, but abusing the idea or the concept make the software very hard to read, very hard to follow what is happening. So 80% of the time, it's better to avoid them. We're going to review details later. So something that you're going to find online, guys, something like this. And I want to ask you, what do you think about this class diagram? Number one, the most important element that hopefully you agree with me. What is that? Well, looks like inheritance. That is the arrow for inheritance. Big recommendation, guys. You are engineers. If you're going to publish a class diagram in some place, use a tool to draw class diagrams or draw the class diagram manually with a pencil. But do not use PowerPoint. That is a class diagram done in PowerPoint, and it's a very bad impression. And these do not have a meaning. It's an arrow, yeah, but that arrowhead do not mean anything. Other things here, well, variables, public, private, protected. Maybe, use maybe, use maybe. Do not forget the plus and minus. Always, always, always use classes, 3 spaces. Mainly when you're going to put only methods, no variables, it's important to represent that. So here we have this one method. It's important to show that there are no variables, and this is the name of the class. Other case, it's very hard to understand if that is a variable and the red one is a method, or what is happening there. Minus, private, plus, public. So is the scope of the methods and the variables. Good question. So remember, in the class diagram, at the beginning, you put before the name of the method, before the name of the variable, minus, plus, minus, private. Usually your variables are going to have this minus. They are going to be private. Pluses for the methods. You can have private methods, as we reviewed before. So just remember this. Another important thing, do you remember what is the meaning of having something, a method, or even a variable with that underline? If you have a class diagram and you have this line below a variable or below a method, what is the meaning of that? Check here, my class with the main method. Did you notice the line below the main? Yes, static, correct. The underline is static. Anything that you have with the line below that method is static or that variable is static. So plus and minus, as you notice here, the line below for the static. So you have the information about is public, is private, is static, is a method, is an attribute, and well, the connection with other elements. So your class diagram should look like this one. In the previous one, just for you, errors. Hopefully you identify them. Your class diagram should look more like this. Something that I recommend you to do, it is not mandatory, but when you create a class diagram, it's a good idea to play a little bit with colors. The colors do not represent anything, but the tools that you use to create the diagrams allow you to give the rectangles some colors. Something that I am going to do in my examples is the following. Usually, I am going to use one color for the classes that correspond to my project, for the classes that I am doing as a developer or that you are going to be doing as developers, and a different color for the classes that correspond to a library that I am using or the Java API. So basically the idea is when you look to the diagram, it is clear for you to identify which classes you are going to work in, like tutor, assessor, companion, universe. Those are my classes. Those is my project. My project is going to have these 4 classes, 4 files. The others are classes that are in a different color. They are part of the Java API. So I do not need to really worry about those other classes. Moreover, usually for these classes, the one that you use from the API, you do not need to include variables or methods. Did you notice? Empty. Why? Because if someone needs to know more about that class, the Java API is there. You can search for information about that class in a different place. However, for your classes, the one that you are creating, you need to put that information because this is new. There is no other place in which the people can learn about those classes, but your diagrams, your documents. Also, usually 2 things. The interfaces. In order to identify an interface from a class, you can do the following. A stereotype, that is the name, angular bracket, interface, angular bracket, above the name. Usually you are going to have that to identify that that guy is an interface, and therefore to be sure that the connections are correct. With an abstract class, something that you are going to have is the name of the class is going to be italic. So when you have a class and the name is used italic, like moving, that is an abstract class. Classes, abstract classes with the name in italic, and interfaces, either 2 options with the stereotype interface, and the second option, some people use circles. Just like that, a circle, the name below. When you have a circle with a name, that circle represents an interface. So you know that you're going to have, for instance, this, and it's going to be used for some kind of inheritance. I recommend you this. So everything in your diagram is boxes. The circles can be confusing. So interfaces, classes, abstract classes, and all the connections. Can you imagine what is this system? What this class diagram represents? Hopefully, sorry, you agree with me in the following. We start reading in the class that have the main. And the main is here. So that is the class that have the main. That should be the beginning of everything. And that class is inheriting from JFrame. And we know that any class that inherits from JFrame is going to basically have a window. That is what happened when you inherit from JFrame in Java. Second, that class looks like it's going to be using some kind of listener, implementing an interface. Good, nothing happened. But then you notice that you have 1, 2, 3 diamonds. Having that can be null. But best case scenario, I am going to have one of these, and one of these. Okay, 3 yellow boxes. So this window is going to have a tutor, an assessor, and a companion. I have no idea what those things are. It's like something in your programs. However, if I continue reading the diagram, it's like, well, this tutor inherits from JPanel. This one inherits from JPanel. This one inherits from JPanel. And I am sure you notice, well, what you are telling me is that your program, your frame, is going to have 3 childs that are panels. I do not know the specifics because I need to review the code inside of the methods. But what I know is this window is going to have 1, 2, 3 panels. I have no idea about the layout. I just put 3 rectangles, same size, and using columns. The details of the look and feel of the graphical user interfaces, I do not know, but I am sure that I have a frame, and I am sure that I have 3 panels. Moreover, if I continue reading the diagram, this one is using an editor, for instance, is going to call a method. That method could be somehow adding that editor here. Notice, I have a panel. I am drawing inside an editor, but the only thing in the diagram is I am using the editor. It's not a diamond there, like these ones. In a program, you have one element, and even though you draw another element inside, that is not mandatory having. Having or not is going to be something in your source code. Using for what? Well, if it's an editor, I am going to use the editor to edit something. And if I am going to edit something, probably, highly probable, it's going to be somehow in the window. The other two, if you notice, they are using labels. And the only use that I have for a label is to print something. So this one is using 2 labels. This one is using 1 label. I do not know what is going to happen here, but one is going to have an editor and the others looks like they are going to have labels for something. And this one is going to be using action listener. So somehow the user is going to interact here with some kind of elements. The only elements that I have are the labels. So something is going to happen with the labels. Maybe clicking the labels is going to trigger something. And I have this slider in universe. So slider, well, the sliders are those things that have, you can move. It directly in this class, the one that have the panels. So it's not inside of any panel, it's outside of the panels. So I have this editor in a panel, another panel with strings, labels, and a slider in some place there. That is what the diagram is telling me. Makes sense? Oh, very good question. Thank you. All these X, this one, and all the others, I take a screenshot of the diagram from the tool. Those X are the points in which I can manipulate the lines. So the X should not be there in the diagram. It's just because it's a screenshot of the tool that I was using to edit. So ignore those X. Don't worry for them. Good. Okay, so good, right? Moving forward, assignment, your program. I want you to work with objects and classes. Reuse some code that you have and do something new. Something that allows you to create several classes. Moreover, something that allows you to play with classes from some kind of library. we start working with this idea before. We have this language and we are doing this translation. I am going to put the translation in a stop by. I am going to work in the lexical part. The translation could be something good for the assignment 3, but let's work only in the lexical part. The lexical part, something that I started doing in a previous lecture was, well, right now we have only keywords and delimiters and strings, names. That's it. And I just mentioned, well, what's happening if we need numbers, and what's happening if we need variables, and what's happening if we need data types. And I show you this example. We need more tokens. What about doing something like this? I would like to have a program in Java with a graphical user interface. Why not? In the graphical user interface, I would really like to have 3 spaces, as you can saw in the picture. In those spaces, well, I would like to be able to write some code here, write something. Maybe copy paste there this example, an editor in one panel. I am talking about a JFrame. I am talking about, I need this editor in one space. In particular, something that I did is I create a panel, and inside of the panel, I put the editor. I give a name to the panel, source code, fancy border. Then what I want to do is to put there some writing, and I want to click run, an option there, a menu, run. I need a menu, another class, more objects. I am going to click run. And when I click run, I want to execute your lexical analyzer. You already have it, right? It's like you have already something, and I am asking you to grab that something with classes that correspond to the Java API for graphical user interfaces, panels, menus, the editor, click run, and somehow you do the lexical analysis. So far, your lexical analysis is done with a string, and that string is something that you read from a file, right? Can you modify that, and instead of getting the string from a file, get the string from this widget, the editor on the screen? Is that possible? And hopefully you agree with me, yeah, there should be some kind of instruction to get the text from the editor, and that get is going to give me a string, and that string is the same that I pass to what I already have, right? Okay, the process is going to be done, and something that I would like to know is if everything works correctly or not. You know, it's always a good idea to notify the user what is happening. So what I am thinking is I would like to have another panel, a second panel. In my example, that second panel, I put that one here with another fancy border and the name console, and I modify the color, so the color is black, the background, but it's used for decoration things. In that panel, I would like to know if everything worked correctly or not. In particular, like in the example, I want a message, and the message is, well, how many lines did you process? In this case, 4 lines. And in those lines, how many words, strings, did you process? And if any of the strings didn't work, if any of the strings is something that you cannot find a type, tell me. In this example, you know what? I take your input. There are 4 lines. I found 15. words that I can classify, but I found others that do not have a type, that I was not able to identify correctly, that any of the rules that we know match them. So use a report. I am not asking you exactly to use this text, but something like that. How many lines, how many correct, how many fail for some reason. Now, the details, the result. Well, I would like to have the result in another panel. For the other panel, something that I am asking you to use. Mandatory, a requirement. I want to use a JTable. JTable, yeah, I have 1 column, 2 columns, 3 columns. And in the table, you show your result. The result, as you notice, the number of the line, I have 4 lines, so you will notice 1, 2, and the 4. The 3 is empty, so there is no words in the line 3. It's just 1, 2, and 4. The token, I am calling token to the category of the word. So far, we have the limiters. So far, you have these names and you have keywords. I am going to ask you for more, but the token, the category in the second column, and the last column is, well, the word, right? This is the information that you have in your data structure. You have a data structure with this data. Maybe not with the line, but it's something that you can ask. But the other two is something that you have in your memory. The only thing that I am asking you is to put that information in a JTable. As you can notice, most of this is one class that you already have and a lot of classes from the Java API. Panels, JTable, layouts, menus, and obviously listeners, at least one listener to check for the run. Why I am asking for these graphical user interfaces? Well, you know what? The main idea, the reason because the object-oriented paradigm become to be important is 80s and 90s. The graphical user interfaces for the software. The first version of Windows, the first application with the mouse and so on, listeners, graphical elements of the screens, that was a key success and is connected with the object-oriented paradigm. So I just want you to experiment with objects, a lot of objects, and whatever approach that you see, graphical user elements, things with Java. So it is clear the idea. You know what you are going to do. Yes, no, maybe something, green, red. Yes, okay, at least one yes. Excellent. So any questions so far? Okay, good question. The tokens. Well, my goal is that you reuse what you have in the previous one, but I am going to ask you to modify what you have. Because my first goal is to ask you to use more classes and more objects. That is going to help to have a more interesting diagram. But the second, what about this extensibility, modificability, and so on in your code? I want to challenge you to improve what you already have in assignment 1 and add the following. So far, you are able to identify 3 tokens: name, keyword, and the limiters. I want you to be able to identify the following. Keyword. You only have if and while, right? That is what you have. Number 1, can we add all the keywords in Java to our project, can we identify not only if and while as keywords, but also maybe for, case, switch, etc., class? There are about 32, I am talking about the core of Java, 32 keywords in Java. I am not asking exactly for those ones, but can you add more keywords? The classical ones: for, switch, case, if, else, and so on. Easy, right? Well, more or less. So far you have the limiters. The limiters is something that you are able to identify. Can you add operators? In particular, can you add arithmetic operator, plus, minus, percentage, division? Can you add relational operators? Minus. Can you identify those words as relational operators? And finally, can you identify logic operators? And or not? Identifiers is something that you already have. Something else. Can you identify values? And I am talking about the following. Can you identify as a values floating point numbers? Something that have a dot is a floating point number. Can you identify integers? Can you identify hexadecimals? Can you identify octals? The octals begin with 0. Can you identify, and this is something that I am asking, new thing, binary 0, B, and zeros and ones? Strings, whatever inside of quotation marks. Characters, whatever inside of single quotation marks. Assignment, thank you for mentioning the assignment. Also part of the arithmetic. Thank you. You already have something working. You already identified 3. I am asking for additional ones. And the reason because I am asking for additional ones is because if you're thinking that the only thing that you are going to do is go to your method split words and just add more conditions, that is true, but that method is going to become complex, a lot of lines, probably more than 50. That was a threshold that we mentioned before. Moreover, the cyclomatic complexity is going to be more than 10. And what do we do when we have a complex method? According with the papers, split. Or if you want to use the fancy word, split things. We need to do something with this method split words because now we have a lot of rules. That is my second part for your assignment. So I am asking you to have all these elements to be able to identify them and add a nice graphical user interface. Second version. Question? Okay, so moving forward. Hopefully it is clear for you after everything that we have been reviewing that now I am expecting at least 3 classes. Talking about your class diagram, talking about the design that you're going to do, I am expecting you to have the lecture. This is what you already have. I am expecting you to separate the lecture from what you have as an information, the token. We already mentioned that in the previous lecture, remember? The opportunity to use information hiding is tokens is something that should go out of the module in which you have all these methods about reading the file and splitting and so on. We need a class, probably token. And I am giving you ideas about what could be the attributes for that class. Moreover, which could be the methods that you need, a class token. A class lecture in which you are going to have your methods, but the most important thing, every single thing that I mentioned regarding the graphical user interface, the frame, the panels, all that stuff should be in a different class, not here. You should not do a class lecture that extend JFrame. The lecture is your functionality. Keep that, use like that. A different class, another class, should take care of the graphical user interface. And this class, the one that have the graphical user interface, should create an object or should use somehow the lecture. That is maybe the most important requirement that I have for you. And for those of you that are familiar, what I am asking is model and view separate. If you remember the model view controller approach. I am not talking yet about the controller, but views and functionalities separate. So a class that is going to have the graphical user interface, a class that is going to do all this process that I am asking for, and the token. I am asking you to work alone or in a team of 2. If you work in a team of 2, my expectation is 1 people can work in the graphical user interface, and that person do not need to do anything with the people that is working with the lecture. Those are 2 separate tasks and can be 2 separate classes. In some point, you need to connect. Aggregation, composition, association, inheritance, different story. But the 2 elements can be done separate. Talking about the source code, use an idea. You can have your class token with exactly 45 lines of code. This is my class token. I am not giving you the code, but use an idea. 45 lines of code. That is the only thing that I need for the token. For the graphical user interface, I am not giving you source code, but you can complete the graphical user interface that I showed you, including the colors and the fancy borders and so on, around 150 lines. I am not showing you the full code here, but around 150 lines. All this graphical user interface, even the fancy that I showed you, is 150 lines, and that means that basically you can finish this in a couple of hours. The only important thing, in some place in your graphical user interface, you need this. And let me be clear. You did an object lecture. You need to pass as a parameter the string that in this case you're going to get from the editor, and you need to receive back somehow the tokens. Why? Because the graphical user interface is going to put those tokens in a table. So you send a parameter, the information, you receive back the results, and then you can work with the results in the graphical user interface. Yeah. Answering the question in the chat. Let me explain this. I run the program. When I run the program, this is empty. This is not here. So I run the program. I have 3 panels. Let me use a different one. Run the program. When I run the program, I am going to have something like this, nothing else. And what I am going to do is something like right here, float, x, semicolon, main, parentheses, curly bracket, by, semicolon, curly bracket. I write something. Even you can copy paste the inputs that you have from the previous assignment. After I do that, step number 2, I am going to click here, run. That is the only option that is going to be working. The file is there for later. Right now, run is the only one. I click run. When I click run, this text is going to be sent to your lecture. Your lecture is going to return results to the graphical user interface. And you tell me, everything go okay? Okay, work. Any message. I read 2 lines. I found ten words. Again, assuming that everything goes fine. After I click run, I need a message below, a message that tells me what happened. Then, at the same time, in this panel, the table, you need to show there. It's going to be too fast, but you like slow motion. In the table, you're going to tell me, you know what? In the line 1, I found this word float, and that is a keyword. In the same line 1, I found this X, and that is a name or an ID. You can use whatever you want. We used name before. In a programming language, usually it's an ID. I found also in the line 1, the semicolon. The semicolon is a delimiter. And then in the line 2, I have this main. Main is use a name or an ID is the category. In the line 2, I found the open parentheses. In the line 2, the closing parentheses. In the line 2, the open curly bracket. And all of them are delimiters. And you get the idea. Continue down with by is an ID or a name, semicolon, a delimiter, closing curly brackets, a delimiter. So what I have is all the tokens, a report of everything go well, and a space to put my input. So this is the input, and this should be my output with this one. That is kind of the summary. Not syntactical error yet. The only thing that I am asking you is for the tokens. You can forget the translation for a while. Probably yes. You can send an email to the TA and asking how the grading is going. I am hoping that you're going to have grades for the assignment 1 this week or during the weekend, but I need to ask. Yeah, this is kind of, my name here is token. The category of a word is name the token, but you can use token or category. It's fine. This is the word, the real word in the text or a string, and the number of the line. I use asking to split words, and identify the categories. Good. As usual, if you have an error, you like before, you stop. I mean, I do not want yet to ask you for handling the errors. So if you have something that have an error, remember in the assignment number 1, what you did is exit or throw an exception or stop or whatever. Here, my recommendation, because now you have a graphical user interface, do not use exit, but you can use exceptions. Lexer, talking about the classes, what we usually do is this class here, back. This one here can throw exceptions, right? But now you need try and catch in the graphical user interface, because when you receive an exception, the graphical user interface should do something, show a message in the panel below, or stop the JTable, whatever, something nice, you know, to let the user know that something happened wrong. You can show a dialog box, up to you, but you need to notify the user that, hey, we stop because this line or this element is wrong, or we cannot continue. Tell the user what is happening. That's it. Anything that you consider an error, just like before, remember, you are doing the review of some tokens. Every one of you could handle this differently, but what if I put here at full? What are you going to do with the at symbol? That is a case of something that is an error, right? I mean, you cannot use the at symbol outside of a string. The only place in which you can use an at symbol is inside of a string, because it's a character of the string. But any other place in which you put an at the beginning of a name, or with a number, or use a lone there, that is something that we consider errors. Similar, an error is, you know that for the hexadecimal numbers, this is good, this is good, but what about 0xw? That is an error, right? Because you cannot use the letters after the F. So that is another example of something that could be an error in terms of the words. I can have X equal this thing. This is good. This is good. This is wrong. And it's going to be wrong until you have another thing that can split. Things like that. That is another example of error. 0b, I am asking for b binary numbers, and binary numbers only work with zeros and ones. So 0b and 1, 2, 3, that should be another error. Yeah. Exactly. Remember, everything related with the translator, the method translate, all the check if, check while, all that part, use standby. You are going to need it later. Right now, I am focused only in what you call it, the lecture, your first module. I am playing with the first module, the one that only read the file, search the words, because that was the easy one, right? The only thing that I am doing is, well, let's put more responsibilities in that one, which basically means I am complicating your method, split words. And I am asking you for, what do we do with that complex method now? Good. You can imagine that something that could happen later is, well, in the same way that you are showing me here all the tokens, maybe later we can have another panel in which we can show the translation. I mean, we can take back all these check things and the translation process and show the results here, and maybe add more rules, not only check ifs and whiles, but other things. But that is a separate story. For now, use the tokens. Use adding complexity to your method that recognize words and playing with graphical user interfaces. Some of you could be familiar with panels and tables and so on. If not, it's your opportunity to review this. They are use classes. They have methods. The only thing is which is the method that I can use and how to put everything together to make it work. One requirement for you, please. I need you to use Java Swing. No JavaFX, no other fancy libraries. I want to limit the requirements to Java X Swing for one reason. My goal for you is not to be expert doing graphical user interfaces with Java, but this is just a tool for us to review the class diagrams, the design, and the good and bad practices. I want to use this as an example to review with you good things, bad things, just like we did before with your code for the models. Well, you need to validate the lexical part, not the syntaxes, because just to be sure, the syntaxis is the combination of words. The syntaxis is what you review in a sentence. Right now, what you're going to do is review words. So the words, the limiter, the word keyword, the word delimiter, the word name, and the new ones, because now I am asking for operators, I am asking for new keywords, and I am asking for these ones, float, integer, hexadecimal, octal, binary, string, and character. I am asking you to add the ones in this slide. And you already have some of this. You have this one, you have this one. This one was called name. So you have these three. I am asking you to add 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 new. Well, there are no methods yet. I mean, if you have something like main, parentheses, and this, right now, what I am asking you to do is to report main, parentheses, parentheses, this, and this. Those are the words, and I am asking you to report, oh, this one is an ID, name. This is a delimiter, this is a delimiter, this is a delimiter, this is a delimiter. This is your work right now, from this to this. The translation process, the one that is check method, check while, check if, check instruction, is the one that later combine this to create those syntactical structures. Right now, you stop that. You're going to need it later. Right now, only the tokens, only identify the different categories of words. Again, if you have main, parentheses, and that, right now, we don't care. Right now is you read this as an input, and your output is going to be this one, this one, this one, and this one, and that's it. Your input to tokens. Yep, mine is a word, is the name, and the others are going to be identified as delimiters. That's it. I start with two things. Remember, the translator, that is the syntactical part, and split the words. I am removing this for now, and I only have this. I have as an input a string, and the only thing that I am asking right now is read the string, and for each of the words in the string, tell me the word and what is the category of that word. And that's it. And for instance, in this same example, if someone put here an @ symbol, my expectation is that you put the @ symbol and you can tell me that is an error. The only thing is an else at the end of all your ifs. And if something didn't match with the things that you already defined, something that do not match, something that is different from all the things that you're reviewing, that something is reported as error. I am using error, but it's the name of the category, right? It's unknown, if you prefer, to avoid error, unknown thing, the last option. I do not know what is that because I do not have a rule for that. Split the string, identify categories, show that in a graphical user interface. That's it. It's going to be a complex collection of lines. My goal is to have different options that you're going to create to solve the problem and talk about the design. Again, token class, 45 lines of code, for sure. This is my class. The graphical user interface, worst case scenario, 150, around that. The most important part is this object that you need to create and call. Other than that, your lexer, well, how many lines in your lexer? I do not know. It's going to depend on your implementation. An idea that I could share with you, more or less, is usually token 50 lines, and the lines are getters, setters, and constructors. Usually, graphical user interface, something between 100 and 200, depending on your programming skills and depending on how fancy your interface is. And the lexer, similar, something 100, 200, depending of how do you handle the connections. The total of the program could be between 250 or 500 lines of code. It's not a big program. It's not a lot of work in terms of coding. Testing is a different story. Nothing to read from a file. Answering the question in the chat, you are going to read the string from the graphical user interface. Whatever I write here, that is the one that you process. This option file is just a decoration there. It's not doing anything, not yet. Good. That's it. Examples, if you want to play with your inputs and outputs, this is an example of an input. As crazy as I can create something. So a crazy input in 2 lines. And this is more or less the output that I could expect. I didn't put here the lines, but you can imagine 1 or 2. Input, output. You can use this to test your assignments. I mean, it's not the only one, but a crazy one that you can use. Good. You do not need to stop, but I am open to that option. The best case scenario, what I would suggest is just report the error, show a message that is continue. Unless, again, your program cannot continue, it's going to be a lot about your implementation, but I am not asking you to stop. My requirement could be try to continue unless you have a particular problem. Again, I can review with you particular cases, but this is the big picture. Guys, I need to stop here. So any question, please send me an email. I am going to be answering your emails during the week, but you have 1 week to finish this alone or with a team of 1. So 2 people in total. Yeah, the slides and the video are going to be on Canvas soon tonight. Good. See you guys. Thank you.